The sand stretched endlessly in every direction, shimmering waves of heat rising from the parched earth as Adelaide Jackson lay crumpled beside an overturned canteen, her lips cracked and bleeding, wondering if this godforsaken desert would be her grave because the man she had trusted with her life had left her here to die. Her husband Thomas had ridden away 3 hours ago, or maybe it was 4. Time blurred when the sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil. They had been traveling from Sacramento to his brother's ranch in Arizona Territory, married only 6 months, and she had believed his promises of a new life. The argument had started over something small. She couldn't even remember what now, but it had escalated as the desert heat amplified every frustration. He had accused her of complaining too much about the journey, about the dust and the heat and the endless miles. She had fired back that he never listened, never cared about her comfort or safety. Then he had stopped the wagon suddenly, his face twisted with an anger she had never seen before. "Get out," he had said, his voice cold and flat. "Thomas, what are you saying?" Adelaide had asked, certain she had misheard. "I said get out of the wagon. I am done listening to your nagging voice." She had laughed nervously, thinking it must be some cruel joke, but he had grabbed her arm and physically pulled her from the seat. She had stumbled, falling to her knees in the sand, and by the time she had struggled to her feet, he was already turning the horses around. "Thomas, please!" she had screamed, running after the wagon. "You cannot leave me here. There is nothing for miles." But he had not looked back, had not hesitated, had simply driven away until he was nothing but a distant speck and then nothing at all. She had stood there in shock for what felt like an eternity, unable to believe what had just happened. Her husband, the man who had vowed before God to love and protect her, had abandoned her in the middle of the Mojave Desert with no water, no food, no shelter from the merciless sun. Adelaide had started walking in the direction they had been traveling, toward Arizona, though she knew it was probably hopeless. The landscape was brutal and unforgiving. Nothing but sand and rocks and the occasional twisted Joshua tree reaching skeletal arms toward the cloudless sky. Her dress, heavy wool that had been practical in Sacramento's mild climate, now felt like a suffocating blanket. Sweat soaked through the fabric, and she knew she was losing precious water she could not afford to lose. Her feet ached in her leather boots, blisters forming with each step. She had fallen twice, the second time scraping her palms raw on the sharp rocks. That was when she had simply collapsed, unable to force herself upright again. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, and she knew the night would bring cold that could kill her just as surely as the heat. She thought of her mother back in Philadelphia, how she had begged Adelaide not to marry Thomas, not to go west with a man they barely knew. But Adelaide had been 22 and desperate for adventure, for a life beyond the suffocating social expectations of Eastern society. Thomas had seemed charming, ambitious, full of dreams about making a fortune in the territories. She had ignored the warning signs, the flashes of temper, the way he dismissed her opinions, the increasing isolation he imposed on her after they married. Now she would die for her foolishness, alone in the desert, and no one would ever know what happened to her. The sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, and at first she thought it was a hallucination brought on by dehydration. But the sound grew louder, and she forced her head up, shading her eyes with a trembling hand. A rider was approaching from the north, moving at a steady canter. Hope surged through her chest, painful and desperate. "Help!" she tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper, her throat too dry to produce sound. She waved her arm weakly, praying the rider would see her against the pale sand. The horse changed direction, heading straight toward her, and as it drew closer she could make out the rider more clearly. A man, tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat and a dark shirt. He pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away and dismounted in one fluid motion, moving with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that spoke of years spent in the sun and wind of the open range. Adelaide tried to answer but could only manage a small nod. The man knelt beside her, his face coming into focus. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features weathered by the elements, intelligent dark eyes that assessed her condition with professional concern, and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. There was a gentleness in his expression that made her want to weep with relief. "Easy now," he said, reaching for the canteen at his hip. "You are in a bad way, but we are going to fix that. I am going to give you some water, but you need to drink slowly. Can you do that for me?" She nodded again, and he carefully lifted her head, supporting it with his free hand as he brought the canteen to her lips. The water was warm, but it tasted like salvation. She tried to gulp it down, but he pulled it away gently. "Slow," he reminded her. "Too much too fast will make you sick." He let her have another small sip, then another, his patience infinite. After a few minutes, her throat felt less like sandpaper and she found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" he asked, his eyes scanning the horizon as if looking for answers. "Where is your wagon, your companions?" Shame flooded through her, hot and bitter. "My husband," she managed. "He left me." The man's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Left you? What do you mean left you?" "We had an argument. He told me to get out of the wagon. I thought he was joking, but he just drove away." Her voice broke on the last words, and tears she had thought herself too dehydrated to produce began streaming down her cheeks. The cowboy was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made her feel truly seen for the first time in months. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried a steely edge. "Some men are cowards." Those simple words broke something inside her, and she began to sob, great heaving gasps that shook her entire body. The man did not seem uncomfortable with her tears. Instead, he shifted to sit beside her in the sand, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort that asked nothing in return. "My name is Ryder Fletcher," he said when her sobs had subsided to hiccups. "I work as a scout and sometimes as a guide for wagon trains. I was heading back to Winnetka, California after delivering a group to Fort Mojave. That is about 15 miles west of here." "Adelaide Jackson," she said, her voice still shaky. "I am from Sacramento originally, but we were traveling to Arizona. My husband has a brother there, or so he said." "Well, Mrs. Jackson, we need to get you out of this sun before you cook like an egg on a skillet. Can you stand if I help you?" With Ryder's assistance, Adelaide managed to get to her feet, though her legs trembled and threatened to give out. He kept a steady arm around her waist, supporting most of her weight as he guided her toward his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes. "This is Copper," Ryder said. "He has a gentle disposition, so do not worry. I am going to lift you up into the saddle, then I will walk alongside. Winnetka is not too far, and we can make it before full dark if we keep a good pace." He lifted her with surprising ease, his hands respectful and careful as he settled her into the saddle. Then he took Kappa's reins and began walking, leading the horse westward as the sun continued its descent. Adelaide clung to the saddle horn, her head spinning with exhaustion and the aftermath of terror. She watched Ryder's broad back as he walked ahead, his stride steady and sure despite the heat and the sand. He had appeared like something out of a dream, or a prayer she had not known she was saying, and saved her life without hesitation. "How did you happen to find me?" she asked after a while, needing to fill the silence with something other than the sound of her own racing thoughts. "Saw vultures circling," he said without turning around. Figured something was dying or dead out there. When I got closer, I saw it was a person, not an animal. Glad I decided to investigate. The casual way he said it made her realize how close she had come to death, how near the edge she had been. I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Fletcher. You saved my life. Ryder, he corrected. And you do not need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same. But they both knew that was not true. The desert was full of stories of people who had ignored the suffering of others, who had ridden past without stopping, who had prioritized their own comfort and safety over common humanity. Ryder Fletcher had chosen differently, and Adelaide knew she owed him a debt she could never repay. As they traveled, the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the temperature beginning to drop. Adelaide shivered in her sweat-soaked dress, and Ryder immediately noticed. "Desert nights are cold," he said, shrugging out of his jacket and handing it up to her. "Put this on." "But then you will be cold," she protested weakly. "I will be fine. I have been cold before." "Put it on, Adelaide." The use of her first name felt intimate but not inappropriate, and she obeyed, grateful for the warmth of the worn leather jacket that smelled of horse and sage and something uniquely masculine. The first buildings of Winnetka appeared as the last light faded from the sky, a small cluster of structures that looked like paradise after the emptiness of the desert. Ryder led Copper down the main street, past a general store and a saloon, finally stopping in front of a modest boarding house with a hand-painted sign that read, "Mrs. Chen's Rooms." "Mrs. Chun is a friend," Ryder explained as he helped Adelaide down from the horse. "She will give you a room and a hot meal, and she will not ask questions you are not ready to answer." The door opened before they could knock, and a petite Chinese woman in her 50s appeared, her face creasing with concern as she took in Adelaide's condition. "Ryder Fletcher, what have you brought me?" "Found her in the desert, abandoned by her husband. She needs care, May. Can you help?" Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from concern to fierce determination. "Of course. Come, child, let us get you inside. You look half dead." Adelaide wanted to protest that she had no money to pay for a room, but Ryder seemed to read her mind. "I will cover her expenses until she can get on her feet," he said quietly. "Mr. Fletcher, Ryder, I cannot ask you to do that," Adelaide said, mortified at the idea of being any more of a burden than she already was. "You are not asking. I am offering. We can discuss repayment later if it makes you feel better. But right now you need rest and food and safety. Let Mrs. Chun take care of you." Mrs. Chun was already ushering Adelaide inside, her small, strong hands surprisingly gentle as she guided her charge toward a narrow staircase. Adelaide looked back at Ryder, who stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, watching them go. "Thank you," she said again. Inadequate words for an inadequate debt. He nodded once, his dark eyes unreadable in the lamplight. "Rest well, Adelaide. I will check on you tomorrow." Then he was gone, and Mrs. Chun was leading her up the stairs to a small but clean room with a real bed and clean sheets and a basin of water. The older woman helped her out of her ruined dress, clicking her tongue at the sight of Adelaide's sunburned skin and scraped palms. "That man who brought you, he is a good one," Mrs. Chun said as she gently washed Adelaide's face and hands. "Ryder Fletcher has brought me 3 women over the years, all of them running from something or someone. He never asks for anything in return, just helps because it is the right thing to do." 3 women? Adelaide asked, some emotion she did not want to examine too closely stirring in her chest. "Not like that," Mrs. Chun said with a knowing smile. One was an elderly woman whose son had stolen her savings and left her at a train station. One was a young girl escaping from a brothel in Nevada. And one was a widow whose stagecoach was attacked by bandits. Ryder seems to have a talent for finding people in trouble. She helped Adelaide into a clean nightgown, soft cotton that felt like heaven against her abraded skin, then brought her a bowl of soup with fresh bread. Adelaide had not realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her, and she ate slowly, savoring every bite. "Sleep now, Mrs. Chun said when the bowl was empty. "Tomorrow we will talk about what comes next. Tonight you are safe." Adelaide lay down in the bed, her body aching and exhausted but her mind racing. She was safe, but she was also alone, with no money, no possessions beyond the clothes Mrs. Chun had taken to wash, and no clear path forward. Her marriage was over, she had no doubt about that, even if the law might consider her still bound to Thomas. No man who could abandon his wife in the desert deserved loyalty or consideration. But what would she do now? Where would she go? She had no family in California, no friends, no skills that would earn her a living in a frontier town. The future stretched ahead like the desert itself, vast and uncertain and potentially deadly. She thought of Ryder Fletcher, his steady voice and gentle hands, the way he had not hesitated to help a stranger. "Some men are cowards," he had said, and she knew he was right. Thomas was a coward, a man who could not handle the smallest challenge to his authority, who would rather risk his wife's life than admit he might be wrong. But Ryder was something different, something she had not known existed. A man who was strong without being cruel, confident without being arrogant, masculine without being domineering. She barely knew him, had spent only a few hours in his presence, but already she felt a connection she could not explain, a sense of recognition that went deeper than logic. She fell asleep with his jacket still draped over the foot of the bed, a tangible reminder that kindness still existed in the world. Adelaide woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee wafting up from somewhere below. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache, and her skin felt tight and hot from the sunburn. But she was alive. She was safe. She was here. Mrs. Chun appeared with a tray of breakfast and a simple dress in a soft blue fabric. "This belonged to my daughter," she explained. "She moved to San Francisco last year to work as a teacher. I think it will fit you reasonably well." The dress did fit, though it was a bit loose in the waist, and Adelaide felt more human once she was properly clothed and had eaten a meal of eggs and toast. Mrs. Chun showed her to a small washroom where she could clean up properly, and Adelaide spent a long time scrubbing away the desert dust and trying to make herself presentable. She was braiding her long dark hair when there was a knock at the front door downstairs, and she heard Mrs. Chen's voice and then a deeper voice responding. Her heart jumped, recognizing Ryder's distinctive drawl even though she could not make out the words. She hurried downstairs, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance, about the borrowed dress and her sunburned nose and the fact that she was essentially a charity case. Ryder stood in the front parlor, hat in hand, looking freshly washed and shaved. He wore clean clothes, dark trousers and a blue shirt that brought out the depth of his eyes, and Adelaide felt her breath catch in her throat at the sight of him. "Good morning," he said, his expression warming when he saw her. "You look much improved." "Thanks to you," she said, "and Mrs. Chun. I do not know how I will ever repay either of you." "We can talk about that," Ryder said. "I actually came to discuss your situation, if you are up for it. Perhaps we could take a walk? It is a pleasant morning, and you might like to see a bit of Winnetka." Adelaide agreed, and soon they were strolling down the main street of the small town. Winnetka was not much to look at, just a handful of businesses clustered around a crossroads, but after the desert it felt like a metropolis. People nodded to Ryder as they passed, and several gave Adelaide curious but not unkind looks. "I have been thinking about your predicament," Ryder said as they walked. "You need a way to support yourself, and you need to establish some independence from your husband. I spoke with a few people this morning, and I may have found you a position, if you are interested." "A position?" Adelaide asked, both hopeful and wary. She knew the limited options available to women in her situation, and most of them were not appealing. "The schoolteacher here," Miss Sarah Williams, is getting married next month and moving to Los Angeles with her new husband. The town needs someone to take over the school. It is not a large school, maybe 15 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, but the position comes with a small salary and a room at the schoolhouse. It would give you independence and a respectable occupation. Adelaide stopped walking, staring at him in astonishment. You think I could be a teacher? Can you read and write? Do basic mathematics? Of course. I had an excellent education in Philadelphia. Then you are more qualified than half the teachers in California, Ryder said with a slight smile. Miss Williams would need to meet with you and give her approval, but I think she would be glad to have someone educated take over her students. Would you be interested? Interest did not begin to cover what Adelaide felt. It was as if Ryder had reached into her chest and pulled out a dream she had not even known she had. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I would be very interested. Good. I have arranged for you to meet with Miss Williams this afternoon. She teaches at the schoolhouse on the east end of town. They continued walking, and Ryder pointed out the various businesses and landmarks. The general store owned by a Swedish couple named the Lindqvists, the saloon run by a former soldier named Jack, the small church that served the handful of families who believed in organized religion, the stable where Ryder kept copper and earned some income by training horses. You train horses? Adelaide asked, intrigued. Among other things, I guide wagon trains in the spring and fall when the weather is good for travel. In the winter I stay here and work with horses, breaking them for saddle or teaching them tricks for riders who want something fancy. In the summer it gets too hot to do much, so I mostly scout and help travelers who get into trouble. Like me, Adelaide said softly. Like you, he agreed. Though I have to say, you are the first person I have ever found who was deliberately abandoned. Usually it is accidents, broken wagons, people who wandered away from their group and got lost. What your husband did, that was something else entirely. It was evil, Adelaide said, surprised by the venom in her own voice. I have been thinking about it all night, and I realized that he did not just abandon me in a moment of anger. He made a choice to leave me in a place where I would almost certainly die. That is not just cowardice, that is attempted murder. Ryder was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You are right, he said finally. It is attempted murder. Have you thought about going to the law? Adelaide had thought about it, but the idea filled her with a weariness that went bone deep. What would be the point? He is probably in Arizona territory by now, out of California's jurisdiction. And even if the law could find him, would they really prosecute a man for abandoning his wife? We both know how the law treats women, especially in matters concerning their husbands. You are probably right about that too, Ryder admitted. But you should at least file a report, establish a record of what happened. It might help you if you ever want to seek a legal separation or divorce. The word divorce hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Divorce was scandalous, expensive, and difficult to obtain, but Adelaide knew it was what she wanted. She could not remain married, even in name only, to a man who had tried to kill her. I will think about it, she said. Right now, I just want to focus on moving forward, on building a new life here if I can. They had reached the schoolhouse, a simple wooden building with a bell tower and a small yard where children could play. Adelaide could see students inside through the open windows, bent over their slates, and she felt a flutter of nervous excitement. This could be your new life, Ryder said, his voice gentle. If you want it. I do, Adelaide said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The meeting with Miss Williams went better than Adelaide could have hoped. The current teacher was a warm, practical woman in her late 20s who seemed delighted to find someone with Adelaide's level of education interested in the position. They discussed curriculum and discipline and the particular challenges of teaching multiple ages in one room, and Adelaide found herself growing more confident with each question she answered correctly. "I think you will do wonderfully," Miss Williams said at the end of their interview. "I will recommend you to the town council, and they will make the final decision, but I cannot imagine they would turn down someone with your qualifications. Can you start at the beginning of next month when my wedding is finished?" "Yes," Adelaide said, her heart soaring. "Thank you, Miss Williams. Thank you so much." She left the schoolhouse feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. She had a path forward, a purpose, a way to support herself without depending on anyone else. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Ryder was waiting outside, leaning against the fence with Kappa's reins loose in his hand. He straightened when he saw her expression. "Good news, I take it?" "She is going to recommend me to the town council," Adelaide said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "I might actually be a teacher, Ryder. I might actually have a life here." His answering smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, transforming his already handsome face into something that made her heart skip a beat. "That is wonderful, Adelaide. I am glad." "It is all because of you," she said impulsively, stepping closer to him. "You saved my life, and now you have given me a future. I do not know how I will ever thank you." "You do not owe me anything," he said, but his voice had gone softer, and his eyes held an expression she could not quite read. "I am just glad I found you when I did." They stood there for a moment, close enough that Adelaide could smell the clean scent of soap and leather, could see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow and the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Something passed between them, an awareness that felt like lightning in her veins, and she saw her own reaction mirrored on his face. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat, and the moment dissolved. "I should let you get back to Mrs. Chen's. You still need to recover your strength." Adelaide nodded, disappointed and relieved in equal measure. She was still legally married, still bound to a man who had tried to kill her, and Ryder Fletcher was far too honorable to pursue a married woman. But the attraction was there, undeniable and powerful, and she wondered what might happen once she was free. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The town council approved her appointment as the new teacher, and Adelaide threw herself into preparing for her new role. Miss Williams spent hours showing her the curriculum, introducing her to the students, explaining the personalities and challenges of each child. Adelaide also spent time with Mrs. Chen, learning about the town and its residents, helping with chores around the boarding house to earn her keep until her teaching salary began. She discovered that Winnetka was a diverse community, home to Chinese immigrants like Mrs. Chen, Mexican families who had lived in California long before it became part of the United States, former slaves seeking new opportunities in the West, and white settlers from all over the country. It was not always harmonious, prejudice and tension simmered beneath the surface, but people generally got along out of necessity if nothing else. And she saw Ryder, not every day but often enough that her heart began to anticipate his appearances. He would stop by Mrs. Chen's on some pretext, checking on her health or bringing news about the town council's decision or asking if she needed anything. They would talk for a few minutes or sometimes longer, conversations that ranged from serious discussions about her future to lighter exchanges about the quirks of Winnetka's residents. Adelaide found herself watching for him, listening for his voice, lighting up inside whenever he appeared. She knew she was developing feelings that went far beyond gratitude, feelings that were dangerous given her marital status and the short time they had known each other. But she could not seem to help herself. Ryder was everything Thomas had pretended to be and never was: honorable, kind, strong, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in her as a person rather than as a possession. One evening about 3 weeks after her arrival in Winnetka, Ryder invited her to have dinner at the small restaurant run by a Mexican family named the Garcias. Adelaide agreed, excited and nervous about what felt very much like a courtship even though neither of them had acknowledged it as such. She wore her best dress, a green cotton that Mrs. Chun had helped her purchase from the general store with a small advance on her teaching salary. She took extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a style her mother had taught her years ago, and pinched her cheeks to bring color to them. Ryder arrived precisely on time, looking handsome in a dark suit that she suspected he had borrowed for the occasion. His eyes widened when he saw her, appreciation clear on his face. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Adelaide replied, blushing. "You look very fine yourself." The restaurant was cozy and warm, filled with the scent of spices and roasting meat. Mrs. Garcia greeted them with enthusiasm, showing them to a small table near the window. The food was delicious: chicken cooked with peppers and tomatoes, fresh tortillas, beans seasoned with cumin and garlic. Adelaide had never tasted anything quite like it, and she found herself savoring every bite. They talked as they ate, the conversation flowing easily as always. Ryder told her about his childhood in Texas, the son of a rancher who had died when Ryder was 16, leaving him to care for his mother and younger sister. He had worked as a cowboy for various ranches, learning the skills that eventually led him to his current work as a scout and guide. His mother had passed away 5 years ago, and his sister was now married and living in San Antonio. "So you have been alone for a while," Adelaide observed. "By choice, mostly," Ryder said. "I like the freedom of my work, the travel and variety. And I suppose I never met anyone who made me want to settle down." The way he looked at her when he said it made her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady. "And what about now? Do you still feel the same way?" Ryder was quiet for a moment, his expression serious. "Adelaide, I need to be honest with you. These past few weeks, getting to know you, I have found myself thinking about things I have not thought about in years. A home, a family, someone to come back to at the end of the day. You have changed something in me, and I think you know it." Her breath caught in her throat. "Ryder, I feel the same way, but I am still married, even if it is to a man who does not deserve the title of husband. We cannot pursue this while I am still legally bound to him." "I know," Ryder said, "and I respect that, but I want you to know that I will wait, however long it takes for you to be free. I will help you get a divorce if that is what you want. I will stand by you through whatever comes. Because I am falling in love with you, Adelaide, and I think I have been since the moment I found you in that desert." Tears sprang to Adelaide's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, because it seemed too fast, too complicated, but I cannot seem to help it. You are everything I ever wanted and never thought I would find." Ryder reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. "Then we will find a way to make this work. I promise you, Adelaide, I will never leave you. I will never betray your trust or abandon you or treat you as anything less than the remarkable woman you are. That is my vow to you, even if we cannot make it official yet." "I believe you," Adelaide said, and she did. She believed him with a certainty that went beyond reason, a deep knowledge that Ryder Fletcher was a man of his word. They sat there for a while longer, hands clasped across the table, making quiet plans for a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. Ryder would help her file for divorce, would testify to Thomas's abandonment if needed, would support her financially if the legal proceedings became expensive. Adelaide would establish herself as a teacher, would build her own life and reputation in Winnetka, would prove that she was more than just a victim or a charity case. And they would wait as long as necessary until they could be together properly. The next morning, Ryder took Adelaide to see the town's justice of the peace, a retired lawyer named Samuel Harrison who split his time between adjudicating disputes and running the general store with his wife. Mr. Harrison listened to Adelaide's story with growing dismay and anger, taking careful notes and asking pointed questions. "This is one of the worst cases of spousal abandonment I have encountered," he said when she had finished. "Under California law, you have grounds not only for divorce but potentially for criminal charges against your husband. However, as you noted, the practical difficulties of pursuing him across state lines are significant." "I am not interested in revenge," Adelaide said firmly. "I just want to be free of him, to have the legal right to move on with my life. Then we will petition for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty," Mr. Harrison said. "With Mr. Fletcher's testimony as to the condition in which he found you and the location, we should be able to establish clear evidence. The process will take several months, possibly longer, but I am confident we can succeed." Several months felt like an eternity, but Adelaide knew it could have been worse. Some divorce cases dragged on for years, mired in legal complications and social scandal. She signed the papers Mr. Harrison prepared, her hand steady despite the enormity of what she was doing. Ryder squeezed her shoulder gently when they left the office. "You are the bravest person I know," he said quietly. "I do not feel brave," Adelaide admitted. "I feel terrified and angry and sad all at once." "Brave does not mean unafraid," Ryder said. "It means doing the right thing even when you are terrified. You are taking control of your life, Adelaide. That is the definition of courage." His words bolstered her, and she drew strength from his steady presence as she navigated the next phase of her life. The teaching position began in early September of 1882, and Adelaide discovered that she loved the work even more than she had anticipated. The children were eager to learn, even the ones who struggled with academics, and she found joy in helping them discover new ideas and skills. The community accepted her with surprising warmth, perhaps because they respected her education or perhaps because Ryder's endorsement carried weight in the small town. Mothers brought her baked goods and invited her to church socials. Fathers tipped their hats respectfully when they passed her on the street. The other women in town, few as they were, included her in their quilting circles and recipe exchanges. And through it all, Ryder was there, a constant presence that felt like coming home. They were careful to maintain propriety, never being alone together in private spaces, never displaying affection beyond what would be appropriate between friends. But everyone in Winnetka could see what was developing between them, and the general consensus seemed to be approval. "Those two belong together," Mrs. Chand said to anyone who would listen. "They fit like two pieces of the same puzzle." The seasons turned, autumn giving way to a mild California winter. Adelaide received word in December that her divorce petition was moving forward, that Thomas had been located in Arizona territory and served with papers, and that he had not contested the proceedings. She felt a mixture of relief and residual hurt at the news. Part of her had hoped that Thomas might try to apologize, might show some remorse for what he had done. But apparently he could not even be bothered to respond. "He is not worth your thoughts," Ryder said when she confided her feelings. "A man who would abandon his wife in the desert is not capable of genuine remorse or love. He did you a favor by not fighting the divorce, because it means you will be free sooner." Adelaide knew he was right, but the wound of Thomas's betrayal still ached sometimes, especially late at night when she was alone with her thoughts. She had trusted him, had believed in their future together, and he had discarded her like rubbish when she became inconvenient. That kind of rejection left scars that would take time to heal. But being with Ryder helped, even when they were not officially courting. He made her laugh with stories about his misadventures as a young cowboy. He listened when she needed to talk about her fears and frustrations. He challenged her intellectually, engaging in debates about politics and philosophy and literature. And he showed her, through 1,000 small actions, that she was valued and cherished. In February, he took her on a picnic to a beautiful spot in the foothills east of Winnetka, a sheltered valley with a spring-fed pond and wildflowers just beginning to bloom. They sat on a blanket he had brought, eating the lunch Mrs. Chun had packed, and talked about everything and nothing. "Tell me about your dreams," Ryder said, lying back on the blanket with his hands behind his head, looking up at the impossibly blue sky. Not the practical ones like teaching or getting divorced. The big dreams. The ones you have never told anyone. Adelaide was quiet for a moment, considering. "I want children," she said finally. "I have always wanted to be a mother, to raise a family with love and laughter and security. I want a house full of books and music and good food. I want to wake up next to someone who makes me feel safe and cherished. I want to grow old with someone who still looks at me the way you look at me now." Ryder turned his head to meet her eyes, his expression tender. "I want all of those things too," he said. "With you, Adelaide. Only with you." She lay down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and they stayed that way for a long time, watching clouds drift across the sky and dreaming about the future they would build together. The divorce became final on April 15, 1883, a full 10 months after Thomas had abandoned Adelaide in the desert. Mr. Harrison delivered the news personally, his weathered face creasing in a smile as he handed her the official papers. "You are a free woman, Mrs. Jackson, or should I say Miss Jackson, since you have requested to resume using your maiden name." "Miss Jackson," Adelaide confirmed, though the title felt strange after 6 months of marriage. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for everything you have done." She walked out of the general store in a daze, clutching the papers that represented her freedom. The street was busy with the afternoon commerce, people coming and going from the various businesses, but Adelaide barely noticed them. She was free. She was no longer bound to Thomas, no longer trapped in a marriage that had nearly killed her. She found Ryder at the stable, working with a young chestnut mare that someone had brought in for training. He looked up when she entered, and she must have had something in her expression because he immediately set down his tools and crossed to her. "It came through," she said, holding up the papers. "The divorce is final. I am free, Ryder." His face lit up with a joy that matched her own, and then he was pulling her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Adelaide laughed, giddy with relief and happiness, her arms wrapped around his neck. When he set her down, his hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle and reverent. "Adelaide Jackson, I have been waiting to ask you this for almost a year now. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Yes, Ryder, I will marry you. I want nothing more than to be your wife." He kissed her then, a sweet, tender kiss that held all the longing and patience of the past months. Adelaide melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart soaring with happiness so intense it almost hurt. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you lying in that desert, so brave and so broken, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Adelaide whispered. "You saved my life, Ryder, in more ways than one. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real partnership should be. I cannot wait to spend forever with you." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church, surrounded by the entire population of Winnetka. Mrs. Chun cried happy tears and declared that she had known from the beginning that they were meant for each other. Miss Williams, now Mrs. Reynolds, traveled from Los Angeles to attend, delighted to see her former protégé so happy. Even the children from Adelaide's school attended, giggling and well-behaved in their Sunday best. Adelaide wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Chen and several other women had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and sleeves and tiny pearl buttons down the back. Ryder wore a new suit, dark and well-tailored, and when she walked down the aisle on Mr. Harrison's arm, acting as a stand-in for her absent father, the look on Ryder's face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The vows were traditional, the same words that countless couples had spoken before them, but Adelaide meant every syllable with a fervor that brought tears to her eyes. She promised to love and honor Ryder, to stand by him through whatever challenges life brought, to be his partner and companion for all their days. And when Ryder made the same promises to her, his voice steady and sure, she knew he meant them just as deeply. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said, beaming at them. "Ryder, you may kiss your bride." And he did. A kiss that was both chaste enough for public consumption and passionate enough to make Adelaide's knees weak. The small congregation cheered, and then they were walking back down the aisle together, husband and wife, beginning their new life. The celebration afterward was joyful and boisterous, held in the churchyard with food provided by seemingly everyone in town. Mrs. Garcia had made her famous chicken with peppers. Mrs. Chun contributed dumplings and stir-fried vegetables. The Linkvists brought Swedish meatballs and lingonberry preserves, and half a dozen other families added their own specialties to the feast. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts, and Adelaide felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This community had welcomed her when she had nothing, had given her a chance to rebuild her life, and now they were celebrating her new beginning with genuine warmth and affection. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the gathering, Ryder pulled Adelaide aside for a moment of privacy. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her face. "I am happier than I ever imagined possible," Adelaide said honestly. "A year ago, I was lying in the desert waiting to die. Now I have a husband I love, a job I adore, a community that has accepted me, and a future full of possibilities. How could I be anything but happy?" "Good," Ryder said, kissing her forehead, "because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They had prepared a small house for their new life together, a 2-room cottage that Ryder had built with help from several men in town. It was modest but cozy, with an iron stove for cooking and heating, a real bed with a feather mattress, a table and chairs, and shelves for Adelaide's growing collection of books. There was even a small garden plot where Adelaide planned to grow vegetables and flowers. The first night in their new home was everything Adelaide had hoped for and more. Ryder was gentle and patient, attentive to her needs and her pleasure, and the intimacy they shared felt like the natural culmination of months of emotional connection. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Adelaide felt a peace she had never known before. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Ryder asked, his hand stroking her hair in a soothing rhythm. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this life." "You saved yourself, Adelaide," Ryder said. "You had the strength to survive that desert, to rebuild your life, to open your heart again after everything you had been through. I just had the privilege of being there to witness it and support it." Adelaide tilted her head to kiss his jaw. "Then thank you for the privilege of being my witness and my support, and for being the man I get to build a life with. Always," Ryder promised, "always and forever." The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both challenges and joys. Adelaide continued teaching, becoming beloved by generations of Winnetka children. She expanded the curriculum, introducing literature and history lessons that went beyond the basics, and several of her students went on to pursue higher education, a rarity for a small frontier town. Ryder continued his work as a scout and guide, though he turned down assignments that would take him away from home for more than a few weeks at a time. He became known throughout Southern California as one of the most reliable guides for wagon trains, someone who could navigate the treacherous desert routes with skill and keep his charges safe. The money he earned, combined with Adelaide's teaching salary and income from his horse training, allowed them to live comfortably if not luxuriously. In the spring of 1884, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The The news filled them both with joy and a touch of nervousness, but mostly joy. Ryder became even more protective than usual, insisting that Adelaide rest when she could and refusing to let her lift anything heavy. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Adelaide protested with affectionate exasperation when he tried to carry her books for her for the third time in one day. "I know," Ryder said, entirely unrepentant. "But you are carrying my child, and I will be as protective as I damn well please." Their first child, a son they named Robert Thomas Fletcher, was born in December of 1884. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Chun and a midwife from a nearby town, and there were moments when Ryder feared he might lose both Adelaide and the baby. But Adelaide proved as strong in childbirth as she was in everything else, and when he finally heard his son's first cry, he wept with relief. "He is perfect," Adelaide said weakly, cradling the tiny infant against her chest. "Look at him, Ryder. We made something perfect." Ryder gazed down at his wife and son, overwhelmed by the intensity of his love for them both. "You are amazing," he said, kissing Adelaide's damp forehead. "You are the strongest, most incredible person I have ever known." Robert was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious, energetic toddler. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's eyes, and he was bright as a button, learning to talk early and asking endless questions about everything he encountered. When Robert was 2, Adelaide became pregnant again, and this time she carried twins. The pregnancy was difficult, and Adelaide had to stop teaching in her 6th month when the weight of carrying 2 babies became too much. The twins, a boy and a girl they named Raymond David and Ruth Alice, were born in June of 1887. They were smaller than Robert had been but healthy, and Adelaide recovered more quickly from this birth than her first. "Our family is complete," Adelaide said one evening as she nursed the twins while Ryder entertained Robert with the story. "5 of us, full of love and chaos and joy. This is everything I ever wanted." "Me too," Ryder agreed, watching his wife and children with an expression of such contentment that it made Adelaide's heart swell. "Though I have to say, I never imagined I would be a father to 3 children before I turned 35. You have made my life an adventure, Mrs. Fletcher." "Good," Adelaide said with a smile, "because you made my life worth living, Mr. Fletcher, and that is a debt I can never repay." The children grew, each developing their own unique personality. Robert was serious and studious, following his mother around and begging to be taught to read before he was even 4 years old. Raymond was adventurous and physical, always climbing trees or chasing after his father's horses. Ruth was sweet-natured and creative, spending hours drawing pictures and making up songs. Adelaide eventually returned to teaching, though she reduced her hours and brought the children with her to the schoolhouse on days when Ryder had to travel. The older students doted on the Fletcher children, and Robert in particular thrived in the academic environment, advancing far beyond his age level in reading and mathematics. Life in Winnetka was not without its challenges. There were droughts that threatened the water supply, occasional conflicts between different ethnic groups in the town, economic downturns that made money tight, and the constant harsh realities of frontier life. But Adelaide and Ryder faced everything together, supporting each other through difficult times and celebrating the good ones. In 1890, when Robert was 6, Raymond and Ruth were 3, and Adelaide was 32, Thomas Jackson died in Arizona Territory. The news came via a letter from a lawyer Adelaide had never heard of, informing her that her former husband had succumbed to pneumonia and that, as she was listed as his only surviving relative in certain documents, she was entitled to a portion of his modest estate. Adelaide read the letter 3 times, trying to parse her emotions. Relief that Thomas could never hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. Sadness for the wasted potential of a life lived in anger and cruelty. And, surprisingly, a kind of closure she had not realized she needed. How do you feel? Ryder asked, reading the letter over her shoulder. Free, Adelaide said after a moment. I have been free legally for years, but somehow knowing that he is actually gone, that there is no possibility of him ever appearing in our lives, makes me feel lighter. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Ryder said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. You have built a beautiful life despite what he did to you, Adelaide. You are an amazing mother, a gifted teacher, a respected member of this community, and the love of my life. Thomas Jackson is nothing but a footnote in your story now, a bad chapter that you survived and moved beyond. You are right, Adelaide said, leaning back against his solid warmth. He is just a footnote. You, Ryder Fletcher, you are the story. You and our children and this life we have built together. That is what matters. She declined the inheritance, donating it instead to a charitable organization that helped women escaping abusive situations. It felt right, a way of transforming something poisonous into something healing. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Ryder's love only deepened. They developed the easy intimacy of couples who had weathered storms together, who knew each other's thoughts and moods without needing words. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they always worked through them with honesty and respect. One evening in 1895, after the children had been put to bed, Adelaide and Ryder sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the California hills. They had added 2 more rooms to the cottage over the years, expanding it to accommodate their growing family, and there were flowers blooming in the garden, bright splashes of color against the dusty landscape. Do you ever think about that day I found you in the desert? Ryder asked, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders. Sometimes, Adelaide admitted. It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person. But I also remember it vividly, the heat and the fear, and then the moment I saw you riding toward me. I thought you were a mirage at first, too good to be true. I am very glad I decided to investigate those vultures, Ryder said with a slight smile. Otherwise, I would have missed out on the best 12 years of my life. 13 years next month, Adelaide corrected. Since they counted their relationship from the day he found her rather than their wedding day. And they have been the best years of my life too, Ryder. You gave me everything I ever wanted, and so much I did not even know I needed. You gave me the same, Ryder said seriously. I was content with my solitary life before I met you, but I did not know what I was missing. You showed me what it means to be part of a family, to have someone to come home to build something that lasts beyond my own lifespan. Our children will carry on after we are gone, and hopefully they will teach their children the values we have tried to instill in them. They will, Adelaide said confidently. Robert already has your integrity and work ethic. Raymond has your courage and adventurous spirit. And Ruth has your kindness and your way of making everyone feel valued. They have your intelligence and determination, Ryder countered, and your capacity for love and forgiveness. You are the heart of this family, Adelaide. I am just the support structure. We are partners, Adelaide said firmly. Equal partners in this life we have built. Neither of us could have done it alone. They sat in companionable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the first stars beginning to appear. Inside, they could hear the children's voices raised in some game or argument, the ordinary sounds of a busy household. It was a far cry from that terrible day in the desert, when Adelaide had believed her life was over. Instead, it had just been beginning. By 1900, the Fletcher family was an established part of Winnetka's landscape. Robert, at 16, was preparing to attend university in San Francisco, having won a scholarship based on his academic excellence. Raymond, at 13, was following in his father's footsteps, already skilled with horses and eager to learn the scouting business. Ruth, also 13, was showing artistic talent and a nurturing nature that suggested she might become a teacher like her mother. Adelaide was 42 now, threads of silver appearing in her dark hair, lines of laughter and life etched around her eyes. She had taught hundreds of children over the years, shaping young minds and helping to build a community that valued education and knowledge. She had written letters to her family back east, slowly rebuilding relationships that had been strained by her disastrous first marriage, and they had finally come to visit the previous year, marveling at the life she had built in California. Ryder was 45, his dark hair graying at the temples, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. He still worked as a scout, though less frequently now, preferring to focus on horse training and spending time with his family. He had become a respected elder in the community, someone younger men came to for advice and guidance. One afternoon in late summer, as Adelaide was preparing lessons for the upcoming school year, Ryder came home early from the stable with an excited gleam in his eyes. "Pack a bag," he said without preamble. "We are going on a trip, just the two of us." Adelaide looked up in surprise. "A trip? Ryder, I cannot just leave. The children need me, and school starts in 2 weeks. Robert is old enough to watch his siblings for a few days," Ryder said. "And Mrs. Chun has already agreed to check on them. We have spent 13 years putting our children first, Adelaide, which is as it should be. But I want to take you somewhere special, just you and me, before Robert leaves for San Francisco and everything changes." Adelaide felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. They had never been away from the children overnight, let alone for multiple days. But Ryder was right that Robert was responsible enough to manage, and the twins were old enough not to require constant supervision. "Where are we going?" she asked. "It is a surprise," Ryder said with a mysterious smile. "Trust me." "Always," Adelaide said without hesitation. 2 days later, they set out on horseback heading west, with supplies for a 3-day journey packed on copper, and a gentle mare named Daisy that Ryder had trained for Adelaide years ago. The children waved goodbye from the porch, Robert looking proud to be trusted with the responsibility, the twins excited about the adventure of being in charge. Even though everyone knew Robert was really doing the work, they rode through familiar territory at first, then into areas Adelaide had never seen. Ryder led them through hidden valleys and along old trails, clearly following a route he had planned carefully. They camped the first night under the stars, and Adelaide felt young again, like the 24-year-old woman who had first begun to fall in love with this cowboy who had saved her life. Late in the afternoon of the second day, Adelaide heard an unfamiliar sound in the distance. "Is that water?" she asked, puzzled. There were no major rivers in this part of California that she knew of. "Not exactly," Ryder said, his smile widening. "You will see." They crested a rise and Adelaide gasped. Stretched out before them, vast and blue and impossibly beautiful, was the Pacific Ocean. She had never seen the ocean before, had lived in California for 13 years without ever making the journey to the coast. Tears sprang to her eyes at the sheer majesty of it, the endless water meeting the endless sky. "Ryder," she breathed. "It is beautiful. I wanted to bring you here," he said softly. "I wanted to show you something as vast and powerful and enduring as what I feel for you." They rode down to the beach, the horses nervous at first about the strange surface and the crashing waves, but eventually calming. Ryder helped Adelaide dismount, and they walked hand in hand along the sand, the water cool against their feet. 13 years ago, I found you dying in a desert," Ryder said as they walked. "You were the strongest, bravest person I had ever met, and I fell in love with you almost immediately. But I did not know then how much you would transform my life, how much joy and meaning and purpose you would bring to every single day." He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Adelaide Fletcher, you are my best friend, my partner, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. I cannot imagine existence without you, and I do not want to try. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on a cowboy who had nothing to offer but his heart. Adelaide was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. You had everything to offer, she said. Your heart, your integrity, your kindness, your strength. You showed me what love really means, Ryder. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. They kissed as the waves crashed behind them, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was a perfect moment, crystalline in its beauty, a reminder of everything they had built together and everything that still lay ahead. They camped on the beach that night, falling asleep to the sound of the ocean with the stars wheeling overhead. And in the morning, they began the journey home, back to their children and their community and their life together. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Robert excelled at university, studying engineering and writing long letters home about his classes and his plans for the future. Raymond discovered a talent for working with difficult horses, earning a reputation as a skilled trainer even at his young age. Ruth began teaching at the elementary school alongside her mother, showing the same natural gift for connecting with children. In 1905, Robert married a smart, capable young woman named Caroline who worked as a nurse in San Francisco. They settled in the city, where Robert took a position with a firm designing bridges and other infrastructure. Adelaide and Ryder made the journey north for the wedding, proud and a little wistful to see their oldest child beginning his own family. Raymond married in 1908 to a rancher's daughter named Maria who shared his love of horses and the outdoors. They built a house near Adelaide and Ryder's, close enough to visit daily, and began their own horse breeding operation with Ryder's guidance and support. Ruth surprised everyone in 1910 by falling in love with a Chinese immigrant named Wei Chun, Mrs. Chen's nephew who had come to Winnetka to help with his aunt's boarding house. There was some tension in the community about the mixed-race relationship, attitudes that Adelaide found deeply frustrating given her own experiences with prejudice and judgment. But she and Ryder supported Ruth's choice completely, and eventually most of the town came around, especially after Wei proved himself to be hardworking, kind, and deeply devoted to Ruth. By 1912, Adelaide and Ryder were grandparents 5 times over, with more grandchildren surely on the way. Robert and Caroline had 2 daughters and a son in San Francisco. Raymond and Maria had twin boys who were already showing signs of their father's horse sense. And Ruth and Wei had a beautiful daughter with her mother's features and her father's dark eyes who was the absolute light of Adelaide's life. Adelaide was 54 now, officially retired from teaching though she still substituted occasionally when needed. She spent her time reading, gardening, helping with the grandchildren, and writing letters to her family and former students scattered across the country. She had finally written down her story, the whole tale of her abandonment and rescue and the love she had found in the aftermath, and it had been published in a women's magazine back east, inspiring dozens of letters from women who had survived their own trials. Ryder was 57, still strong and active despite some arthritis in his hands from decades of hard work. He had mostly retired from scouting, though he still trained horses and served as an informal advisor to younger guides. He spent his days working with Raymond on the horse breeding operation, playing with his grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Adelaide in the evenings, watching the sun set just as they had done for nearly 30 years. One evening in late autumn, as they sat together wrapped in a blanket against the desert chill, Ryder said quietly, "I have been thinking about that day I found you. Do you realize it has been almost 30 years? 29 years and 4 months, Adelaide said with a smile. I may not remember what I had for breakfast, but I will never forget that date. August 12, 1883. You had been left to die, and instead you got a whole life, Ryder said. Children, grandchildren, a career, a community that loves you. Everything. Because of you, Adelaide said. Because you saw someone in need and did not ride past. Because you were kind when you did not have to be, generous when you had nothing to gain, patient when you could have demanded more. You are the best man I have ever known, Ryder Fletcher. Some men are cowards, Ryder said, echoing the words he had spoken that first day. But some men are not. I am glad I got to be one of the not cowards for you, Adelaide. Being your husband has been the greatest honor of my life. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Inside, they could hear the sounds of Ruth and Way visiting with their daughter, the little girl's laughter ringing out like bells. It was a sound of joy, of family, of life continuing forward into new generations. Adelaide thought about the woman she had been in 1883, broken and abandoned in the desert, believing her life was over. She thought about all the years since, all the moments of fear and triumph, sorrow and joy, challenge and victory. She thought about the children she had born and raised, the students she had taught, the love she had shared with the man beside her. I would not change a single thing, she said aloud. Not the suffering, not the struggle, not even the desert, because it all led me here, to you, to this life. And this life has been more beautiful than anything I ever imagined. Ryder squeezed her hand, his grip still strong after all these years. Same, Adelaide. I would walk through 1,000 deserts if it meant finding you at the end. They stayed there together until the moon rose high and silver, illuminating the landscape in pale light. And when they finally went inside to their bed, their home, their life together, they went with grateful hearts and the deep peace of two people who had found exactly where they belonged. The years that followed were quieter, the rhythm of life slowing as Adelaide and Ryder moved into their 60s and then their 70s. But they remained active in the community, respected elders whose story had become part of Winnetka's folklore. Young women facing difficult marriages or situations would sometimes come to Adelaide for advice, and she would share her story, her survival, her hard-won wisdom about strength and resilience and love. Their children thrived, building their own legacies. Robert's engineering firm became one of the most respected in San Francisco. Raymond and Maria's horse breeding operation supplied quality animals throughout Southern California. Ruth and Way opened a school that welcomed children from all backgrounds, teaching both English and Chinese, preparing a new generation for an increasingly diverse world. The grandchildren grew, and then there were great-grandchildren, and Adelaide and Ryder's small cottage that had begun with just the two of them became the center of a sprawling, loving family that gathered for holidays and celebrations and ordinary Sundays. In 1925, on their 42nd wedding anniversary, the town of Winnetka threw a celebration in honor of Adelaide and Ryder Fletcher. Nearly 200 people attended, including former students now grown with children of their own, families they had helped over the years, friends they had made in 4 decades of generous living. There were speeches and toasts, stories shared about the impact the Fletchers had made on the community. Mrs. Chan, now in her 90s and still running the boarding house with the help of her extended family, stood up and declared that Ryder and Adelaide were proof that true love existed and that good people still walked the earth. Adelaide, now 67 with completely silver hair and a face lined by decades of laughter, stood with Ryder's support to address the crowd. I want to thank you all for this beautiful celebration, she said, her voice still strong and clear. And I want to tell you all something important. 43 years ago, I was left to die in the desert by a man who should have protected me. I was alone, terrified, and certain my life was over. But then this man, Ryder Fletcher, chose to stop when he could have ridden past. He chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. He chose to see me as a human being worthy of help rather than as someone else's problem. She turned to look at Ryder, her eyes shining with tears. That one choice, that single decision to be a good man on a hot August afternoon, changed everything. It gave me my life back, and then it gave me a life more wonderful than I ever imagined. It gave me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It gave me a career I loved and a community that accepted me. Most of all, it gave me 42 years and counting with the love of my life. She looked back at the crowd. So I want to encourage all of you to make those choices. Choose kindness. Choose compassion. Choose to help when you can, to stand up when you should, to be brave when it matters. Because you never know how one small act of goodness might change someone's entire world. The applause was thunderous, and Adelaide sat down, overwhelmed by the love and support that surrounded them. Ryder, his own eyes damp, pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You continue to amaze me, Mrs. Fletcher," he whispered in her ear. "And you continue to inspire me, Mr. Fletcher," she whispered back. They danced that evening, slowly and carefully, their bodies no longer young but their love as strong as ever. And when they went home to their cottage, surrounded by photographs of children and grandchildren, by books and memories and a lifetime of shared experiences, they went with full hearts and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Adelaide Fletcher passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1932 at the age of 74, surrounded by her family. Ryder, devastated by the loss of his partner of 49 years, followed her just 6 months later, his children certain that he had simply decided he could not bear to be apart from her any longer. They were buried side by side in the Winnetka Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Adelaide and Ryder Fletcher, beloved parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and friends, united in life, united in death, united in love forever." Their legacy lived on through the generations they had created, through the students Adelaide had taught who became teachers themselves, through the people Ryder had guided and helped, through the countless small acts of kindness and courage they had modeled every day of their lives together. The story of their love, born from tragedy and abandonment, grew into legend, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, and that true love, the kind that saw you through deserts both literal and metaphorical, was worth any weight, any sacrifice, any risk. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this world, Adelaide and Ryder Fletcher walked together still, hand in hand, their love story continuing into eternity.